And with us now to discuss what's happening in Minnesota is Gerrard Filitti. He's an attorney specializing in counter-terrorism. He's also senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. Gerrard, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Now, let's get right to the terrorism allegation. It is your area of expertise. It's shocking to think that American taxpayer dollars could be aiding terrorist groups. Who are Al-Shabaab, and do you believe Minnesotan money could be funding them?
It's certainly possible that it's funding Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab is an Islamist terrorist group in Somalia. It sprang up in the early 2000s in response to what was a civil war and occupation by neighboring Ethiopia that started in 1991 and has continued to this day. That country is a very dangerous spot where there's still an ongoing conflict. This is very much like other terrorist organizations, Islamist-based. It's an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, and it has been responsible for numerous terrorist attacks around the world. It has connections with Minnesota. Since 2007, Somali Americans have traveled to Somalia and joined Al-Shabaab, trained with them, and committed terrorist attacks on their behalf, as well as on behalf of Al-Qaeda. So that link has been there for a while, and this is a proper investigation now by the government to see just how deep these ties run.
Now, the fraud that is allegedly funding this group goes back at least as far as the pandemic, and the scale is incredible. Some estimates put it at over $1 billion. Now, dozens have already been charged in connection with part of it. How would you describe it to anyone who is just learning about it now?
Well, I think it's very concerning to see how foreign terrorist organizations get money from within the United States, either through fraud at the expense of U.S. taxpayers or by money laundering operations involving small businesses and enterprises, which usually also get federal assistance or taxpayer assistance in some sort. So this is a massive scheme that involves moving money offshore from the United States to fund terrorist activities. These allegations have not yet been proven with regard to the fraud happening in Minnesota, but given past history and some of the connections involved, it's certainly a possibility, which is why, a strong possibility, which is why this is being investigated.
And Gerrard, 91% of those charged so far are Somali. President Trump recently called Minnesota a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity and said he would end temporary protected status for Somalis. Now, there are 87,000 Somali people in Minnesota. If they refuse to leave once their temporary protected status ends, are we likely to see ICE conducting mass deportations?
It's possible, but the number of people in America, Somalians in America, who are subject to temporary protected status is actually under 1,000. While most of them probably do live in Minnesota, that is the hub. It's not the full 81,000. That refers to the larger population of Somalians, many of whom have received green cards and other status over many years of living here, and many of whom have immigrated lawfully through a visa process. So the number affected by the end of the TPS program is not that big compared to the population, but this is all very significant, especially in light of the attack in Washington, D.C., where we did see foreign national, an Afghan, who was not properly vetted, commit an act of terror against American service members. So this concern with Somali members of the community is very timely given those events.
And to your point, given that most of the people involved are naturalized U.S. citizens or U.S. born, what options does the government have here? Could we see denaturalizations or prison terms?
Denaturalization is certainly possible. That's something that the government is exploring in certain cases, including people connected to Hamas and other terrorist organizations. That is something that is expressly allowed by law, by federal law, but that is something that would be going through the court system. These people would have due process, ability to be heard and challenge this. So that is certainly a process. For American citizens, there is nothing that can be done. If they are involved with terrorist organizations or committing crime, then they will be charged and they will have to be convicted or found innocent in a courtroom.
Now, in the legal realm, the leaders of organizations under investigation actually went on the offense, suing the state for racial discrimination, and won, with Governor Tim Walz giving a nonprofit executive an award for outstanding refugee. Given that, how do you see this administration navigating the legal realm here? What are you watching for in next steps?
This is something that we're seeing not just in connection with Minnesota and Somalis, but with other minority groups as well, that whenever the government wants to engage in action that is inimical to their interests, such as engaging in deportations or limiting visas, there's the claim of racism or the civil rights violations. As a civil rights lawyer, I am sensitive to these claims. However, we have to remember that there is always due process, that these people are afforded a hearing and an opportunity to be heard when they are accused of something. So I think that the government is looking at legitimate national security interests and noting that given the proportion of terrorism in these parts of the world, in places like Somalia and Afghanistan, that this is not something that is being done by the federal government with a racist intent or with an intent to discriminate, but rather an accurate reflection of the state of world affairs. So in putting it bluntly, this is a national security exercise by the government and not one in discrimination.
And Gerrard, taking a step back here, there's also a political angle given how big a voting bloc the Somalis are in Minnesota. You have Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz finding himself blasted on all sides for essentially allowing the alleged fraud to continue. Now, he said in a post on X today, "We welcome support in investigating and prosecuting crime, but pulling a PR stunt and indiscriminately targeting immigrants is not a real solution to a problem." What do you make of the political angle here?
Well, the political angle is very interesting because we do have notable members of the Somali community who are involved in government and have been elected, whether it's to Congress or to the state legislature. So there is always the political aspect of this. But ultimately, we have to set the politics aside and look at the law and make sure that the law is enforced. And it was Minnesotans who suffered, Minnesota citizens who have nothing to do with Somalia and have no ties to immigration status, that suffer when there is massive fraud on the scale of $250 million to over $1 billion, as may have been the case. So we need to follow the investigation. We need to allow the government the opportunity to prosecute those involved and ultimately keep politics out of this, even though that's very difficult because of the large base in the Minnesota population of the electorate that is supportive of the Somalian population.
Gerrard Filitti, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.